What's up, everyone? Welcome into episode number 496, where it is my honor and privilege to introduce a special guest joining this episode who is from Michigan but swims at FAU, Gianni Carlino. How are you doing, man?
I'm doing great tonight. I appreciate you having me on, and I'm more than happy to, come on here and answer some questions and get to talk to you for a little bit.
Yeah, no, I'm excited that you were able to make this time work. I know that obviously the season's just starting up for you. I'm sure you have meets coming up here shortly, so I really appreciate you taking a few minutes out of your day to just join. But I'm a little jealous, obviously, of you being down in Florida, enjoying the nice Florida weather, also being able to swim outside. So honestly, like, how fun is it being down in Florida and being a swimmer, enjoying the sun? Like, is that actually as fun, or is there a little bit of kind of side effects or like things people don't necessarily think about that you might not enjoy as much?
Well, in terms of practice, I mean, I have always enjoyed being able to swim outside especially in the mornings where it's not too warm, because
Yeah.
that's the big thing. A lot of people, I'm sure, would be like curious, is it too hot, with the sun and all that? But in the mornings, it's usually pretty cool. Not going to say cool, but it's usually cold enough to where you can still get in and feel the refreshing kind of feeling of the water, and
Yeah.
then it's not too hot outside in the air to where you're like sweating every time it makes you sweat. And so that's been pretty enjoyable. And the sunlight is a little bit kind of, when we do our afternoon practices, that can definitely, I mean, I'm not a backstroker, so it doesn't affect me as much as I'm always looking down at the bottom of the pool. But for our backstrokers, I know sometimes that sun can be a little bright on some
Yeah,
days.
I was just going to say for backstrokers, that has to be pretty brutal, being basically blinded by the sun the whole time. But for you, it's probably like, hey, I'm just enjoying this nice weather outside and doing something that you love to do,
Exactly, and it gives me a tan too. So
which is an added bonus, right?
absolutely, absolutely.
And then you also in the ocean as well, so you get to do a little bit of open water swimming. We'll definitely talk a little bit more about the difference between open water swimming and pool swimming, but it's just really cool that obviously you get those two different aspects of swimming, because if you're not in Florida, if you're not down south, you're not going to get that opportunity like that comparatively to other schools.
Absolutely. I mean, it's a blessing to get the ocean right there, and it's something like you said that just few schools have that. And so to be able to go there sometimes, do some fun stuff on the beach, do some ocean swimming, for someone like me, that's pretty enjoyable, pretty fun, and obviously it's taken some getting used to,
Yeah.
because I've never been an open water guy, throughout my career, and and never something I ever was really, introduced to until recently. And so I've had fun just getting used to it and learning all the ins and outs of, how much different it is, trying to navigate the currents and the waves. And it's a whole different, ball game when you're in the ocean for sure.
Exactly. And did you ever like imagine yourself kind of being in the position that you are down in Florida swimming, or was that something that really kind of became more of a possibility and just more of in the picture for you when you kind of started to get a little bit more involved in swimming, knowing it was a sport for you?
I mean, it really wasn't until I started recruiting. I always thought I would stay, pretty close, because our family's always been pretty close in terms of like staying around Michigan and staying, within our little bubbles. So for someone to leave the nest kind of as far as I went,
Yeah.
it pretty unprecedented in our family. And so, once I started getting into high school and talking to schools, I mean, most of them were in the Midwest, not too far. And FAU was kind of the one that was far, I'd say, comparatively. And so, I thought, let's try it. Florida, it's like you said, the weather and the atmosphere is something, that you're not going to find at every school. And so, that was definitely something I thought about as I went through my whole recruitment. And, when I actually committed here, it was like, wow, I'm gonna be down kind of in this place that's pretty far away from home, and
Yeah.
it's probably gonna take some getting used to, and it's a whole different state. The weather's different, everything. It's gonna take some time to get adjusted, but I think now, I've definitely gotten used to the Florida life, I guess, if you could say, how things are different down here. And it's always good to, be back home and go home in Michigan
Absolutely.
again. But, there's definitely, positives and negatives to being in each place.
I'm going to kind of pit against each other, both states, a little bit here before we kind of get into swimming a little bit more. Which one do you enjoy more? Do you enjoy Florida or do you enjoy Michigan? I'm going to kind of put you in the hot spot a little bit, make you choose between two of the states that you've gotten to know pretty well.
Hmm. That's a good question. I mean, overall, I think the experience back home, just being with your family and being back with all the people you've grown up with, I think that's hard to beat, just that connection, and when you're back home, even though sometimes, a lot of times when I go home, especially during the season, it's 20 degrees and snowy because we're not getting to go home until, Thanksgiving and
Oh, yeah.
Christmas. And so, the weather's always a little bit of a shock when I go back home, but I definitely love having that, connection and being back with everybody when I'm back home in Michigan. But again, being here as well with all my teammates and the Florida lifestyle, like you said, and the weather's always nice. I think it definitely, they both have their perks. I'd say during the summer, I like being home in Michigan
Oh,
because
yeah.
the weather is a little bit more fair, I guess you could say. Not as hot, not as humid. You know how the Florida summers here, it's so humid and hot and just nasty, during those summer months. Being back home is definitely a little bit nicer for me at least. But, being here during the winter and then, seeing how cold and dreary and gray it is up in Michigan and then coming back down here to the nice weather where it's still, 70, 80 during December and January. It's like, yeah, this is pretty nice.
So basically, you're the average Michigander where you're like, I enjoy Michigan for X amount of months, but then
It,
after those X amount of months, just get me down to Florida for a little
the
bit.
snowbird, yep, the average snowbird, pretty much.
I love that. And you talked a little bit about like family, like the importance of family. Was your family involved in swimming? Because it seems like it's a sport that for a lot of people it's family driven. Like it's like my parents did it, maybe a sibling did it, maybe my cousin and grandparents did it. You don't really truly see a lot of people join the sport just by themselves. There's usually some sort of family involvement there.
Yeah, so my sister and I, we started at the same time, and it was my mom's decision to get us started into swimming, because it stemmed from when I was at just a summer pool. I accidentally fell in on it was still the shallow pool, but
Okay.
I was, like a 5-year-old kid, so I
Yeah.
still wasn't very tall, and so I couldn't touch. And so my grandma actually had to jump in and save me.
Ah.
And I think that was pretty much the moment where I was like, we got to get this kid to learn how to swim. And then my sister, she kind of knew how to swim, but we actually wanted to get into the sport. And so my mom was like, why don't we sign up for our summer club team? Just because that's how a lot of kids start, was you go
Yeah.
to your summer club and it's a fun environment, and you have your team and you do your finals. And so I got immersed into swimming through that. And I think originally my dad, he wasn't as into swimming really. He kind of was like, yeah, they got their meets, they got whatever. But he wasn't like super into it. And as I started to get better and better and get older and older and start going to more, high level meets, he definitely started, finding that connection with it, as through me especially and my times and comparing with other people in the state. And as I've gotten older, I think he might actually know more about swimming now than I do. I mean, he's like an encyclopedia for my times, for other people's times,
Oh, that's awesome.
all the people I've raced. I mean, you could ask him any race and any, time and what I went, and he'd probably get it to a T.
Oh, wow.
And
That's crazy.
yeah, and so we've had that connection, and it's something we can always talk about. And he's always supported me. My whole family supported me. My mom still, she doesn't know as much about the inner workings of swimming, but she definitely supports me always. And so it's been really nice to have that family support, and they love watching me swim as well.
And it has to be cool seeing them like grow with you in the sport. Obviously, they're not competing. They're not the one that's getting time. They're not the one in college competing against some of the best swimmers in the entire country. But like you talked about, and you could just see in your face of how excited, of how proud it was making of you, is that just seeing how they kind of grew along with your journey. And it truly started when you were young, and then you kind of just got a handle on it after that. It's just really cool, kind of just seeing a little bit of how proud you are that they also are continuing to not only support you, but they're getting involved in the sport as well.
Exactly. And they actually, I feel like a lot of the times they feel the same emotions as I do before a race, like the feelings of, sometimes it's nervousness, sometimes it's like confidence. They have their timers sometimes and they're timing and they're doing up in the stands. So they know
Oh, that's
exactly,
awesome.
they know exactly where I'm on, like if I'm on pace and they get that feeling of excitement too. And so it's kind of like that shared bond, like even though they're not the ones swimming, those feelings, you can understand those feelings through each other.
Exactly, and that's important, especially in events that you do, because you're a distance swimmer. And for a lot of people, they might go to meet, they might think like a 50 or like 100 is like exciting. They might look at like a miler like you and see like 14, 15 minutes and say, how's that exciting to watch? And it's truly awesome that they not only think that's exciting, but like, how did you become a distance swimmer? Was it something that like they just kind of put you in and you end up just turning out to be really good? Is it something that they put you in and you enjoyed and you started getting good a little bit later on? Like, why would I don't want to say why would someone choose distance, but it's almost like how did you end up distance and why did you end up distance?
Yeah, so I started out kind of as a IM butterflyer more. Like I do the 4 IM, I do the two flies, I do the two frees sometimes. Didn't really get up into those long races, right, until I was about 11 or 12. But, as I started going to more and more, better competitions and racing better competition, I realized one, you know, there's levels to this swim thing. I always thought I was a, okay swimmer, right? But then I'd go to like states or junior Olympics or whatever in
Yeah.
Michigan, and these kids would be huge and they'd be fast and they'd beat you by like 10 seconds in a 100 or 200 fly. And at that point you realize, wow, like, there's still a long ways to go before you can really like, get to that level.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, as I got to about 12, 13, 14, that was kind of the moment where my coach put me in the mile for the first time. And I swam it pretty good for, 12 and 13. I don't think I went like 18, 19 minutes, but
Okay.
it was the way I swam it and the way I paced it. He was like, I think that was for the first moment he was like, we might have something in distance here. And so I believe it was the summer before my freshman year. My coach sat me down during August, like it was August, a couple weeks before the season, and he was like, look, we think you have a future in distance swimming. He's like, we think you have the capacity to do it. We think you have the pace, the stroke. He's like, I think that's where you're going to really start to find, your niche in swimming and where you're going to excel. He's like, it's going to take a lot of training though. And so I went on this program where I was, mornings, doubles was, before and after school.
Yeah.
Mornings we just pump out the aerobic yards. I mean, it was probably about 7 or 8 different sets, and I don't
Okay.
think any of them were below like a 400 in terms of distance. It was either 12 fours, 10 fives, 8 sixes, 6 800s, 5 1000s,
Yeah.
3 miles off the block. And I mean, this was all school year. We were doing this stuff. And obviously, you're getting to high school, you start to grow a little bit and develop. And so I grew a few inches. I think I went from about 5'1" or 5 foot to about 5'4", 5'5", and I think that played a big role in my time drops. So I had went to nationals my 8th grade year, that spring before this
Okay.
whole meeting, and I was a little bit sick, but I had started swimming those events. I swam them okay, right, and it was a good start. It was a good baseline, but I knew I had more in me. And
Yeah.
so we go through this training regimen, and it's hard. I mean,
Oh
but
yeah.
I definitely found like the true distance grind at that point in my life and in my career. And we get to the spring, and I go to that same meet, and it's the NCSA age group meet down in Orlando. And I end up, I believe, dropping from the year before, I dropped 20 seconds in the 500, like a minute and 8 seconds in the mile. I actually ended up winning the mile too there.
Oh wow.
And yeah, and I mean it was a pretty good time. I mean, comparatively when you compared it in, the age range. And so at that point I was like, okay, there's something here,
Yeah.
and you got to build on it and learn and start to figure out kind of where, it's going to take you from here. And I think as I got older and older, where I grew a couple more inches, but I didn't grow as much as I thought I would. I
Yeah.
ended up only being about 5'7", maybe 5'7",
Okay.
and obviously you're never gonna compete with the guys in the 200s and the even the 400s. Really, it's you kind of you see like, okay,
Yeah.
I'm stuck kind of in this position where it's going to be distance or nothing if I want to
Exactly.
really, break through for college. And that's where I knew I was going to make my money, per se, once I got to college. And so, I grinded out through high school and that distance training and, slowly improved. And there were some good times, and there were some definitely tough times in there where you hit the stagnation and you struggle to drop time. But I finally, that my junior year, that's a story I think we can get into probably down, a little bit later. But my junior year, I finally saw that breakthrough that I needed for, recruiting. And coaches were finally like, I starting to get those looks, and the coaches were like, we think you can be a good piece on our team. We like the way your times dropped. And so, that's kind of where the distance carried me. And here I am now, still grinding out the distance yards. I found a home, and I found kind of my role, per se, on a college swim team.
Yeah, because everyone has a role, right? Like everyone has a specific set of skills. Everyone has a specific like events that they do. Like sprinters are going to obviously do the sprint events. You have some IMers that are going to do the 2 IM, 4 IM, which is absolutely brutal. You have your distance swimmers that might do your 500, your 1,000 mile. Like everyone has a specific role, and you eventually found that role kind of towards it truly seems like the beginning of your freshman year, but you talked about kind of the training that you had, not doing anything less than a 400. Was there ever a time during that training that you remember where you're like, is this even like worth it? Like, do I even enjoy this? Like, is obviously it's not going to be fun like the whole time. You mentioned it, you're going to go through ups and downs, but like when you're doing that, like what made you want to continue to swim? Because some people might see that and just realize not only how physically difficult that is, which we'll obviously talk about, kind of the toll that swimming distance can take on you physically, but mentally, like that had to be insanely stressful and difficult as well. Because you mentioned earlier, you're looking down at a lane line and you're doing that for hours on end. Like it has to drive you a little bit crazy at some points.
Yeah, so I attribute a lot of that to just one, my general kind of relationship with the sport. I know for a lot of people as they get older and they get, more and more into their swimming careers, a lot of times it can be really difficult to make it through, especially when you get to the senior year of high school. That's always a tough one where you're, almost to college, and for some they just want to get to college, and for some they're
Yeah.
just trying to make it through their senior year of swimming. And so you find those moments, and I find, for me, the senior year was of high school was really tough with the stresses of recruiting and trying to hit times, and just, feeling like I was really in that stagnant kind of where the times just weren't dropping after a really good junior year, and trying to, build back post COVID, because we're just, we were coming out of COVID at this point. And so, we're just trying to get back on our feet in terms of regular training cycles again and getting used to that. And so I think there were a lot of times during that year where I was just like, man, like this is a tough, this is gonna it's almost more mentally challenging than the physical aspect, even when you talk about distance.
Yeah.
Like, for me, it's distance, it's gonna be a lot of yards, it's gonna hurt physically, and you're gonna be in that pool for a while, and your arms are gonna be sore.
Absolutely.
But the whole other battle is, you know, am I good enough? Am I doing the things I need to do, for recruiting? Is it going to be enough? You ask yourself these questions, and that doubt starts to, trickle in. And swimming, it's such a mental sport that, you end up overthinking your races and just not performing to the level you need to, with those recruiting pressures on you. And so there was definitely, going into my championship season, my senior year, where I had gotten sick right before my two biggest meets, my high school state meet and our nationals.
Okay.
And so I had to make the decision to not swim my races at the high school meet to focus on the nationals and hopefully get healthy enough
Yeah.
for that meet. Because I knew with my recruiting, goals and the times I needed to hit, I couldn't afford to not be in the best shape when I swam my first meet and then, have nothing left for that second meet. I knew I had to prioritize, what's going to give me the best chance, not just in this moment, but for the next 4 years. And
Absolutely.
so, going into that meet and just not knowing and having to take, days off that week leading up because I was sick. And, I mentally, I was in this whole headspace of, wow, like I have no clue what's going to happen here. And if this doesn't go the way I need it to, like I could be, recruiting wise, this could be a train wreck,
Yeah.
And so that moment I think was probably mentally the hardest for me throughout all of the swimming I've gone through. And, the meet went okay, right? I swam my races. I went pretty close to my best times,
Okay.
but I didn't hit the times I needed to.
Yeah.
And so, getting on the phone with the college coaches after, and I'm telling them, like, hey, I didn't hit these times, but here's the situation. I gave it what I had. I wasn't going to just back down from this and not give myself a chance to show you guys my, training and what my training has led up to. And even though it's not where I wanted to be, it's the mental toughness and fighting through the physicalities of distance swimming not at 100%, because it's maximum, like the sickness factor when you're not at 100% when you swim the mile or the 500, it's going to show.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't fake the train. Unfortunately, you can't fake it. And so I just told them, well, the times aren't what I wanted. The mental aspects and what I've learned and how to mentally be tough, I feel like I've gotten more out of that than anything, and I feel like that's prepared me, to be a member of your team. And it was a waiting game. I had to wait, but luckily I ended up getting a spot here after that, and the rest is history.
Yeah. And you only needed one school or a couple of schools to take a shot on you, right? Like to see kind of the grind, to see the effort that you put in. That even though swimming is a sport that is going to be solely based on time, like it's one of those sports that there's truly no this or that. Like you might in football might have a good play, you might have a bad play. You put that good play on film. Well, guess what? In swimming, this is your set time. This is your best time. This is your worst time. Like it's solely based on time, and obviously, like you said, there's certain things that come along with it. If you're not feeling well, probably not necessarily going to swim your best, which means you're not going to have your best time, which obviously, like you said, can affect your recruiting. Luckily, it didn't affect you too much. You still got the opportunity to swim at FAU, a D1 school, which is a great university, a great swim team. We'll talk about that here shortly, but you talked about like the mental side of things, just kind of, it's not mental, but like the sickness part, but also kind of the mental part that you had to really deal with because the sport is so mentally tough, because that's just what distance is. Obviously, you talked about how physically bad it hurts. Like, I'm sure probably after a couple hundred yards, you probably can start feeling it a little bit, if I would have to guess. But, like, what kind of, like, mental, like, techniques do you use to kind of, like, push through, like, discomfort and, like, the physical challenges of distance swimming?
Yeah. So for me, it's always been just a go with the flow type deal. I mean, and that's in every aspect of my life. Like, I think I have a pretty good tendency to have things just roll off and kind of, if there is a hurdle, just being like, okay, that's okay.
Yeah.
We'll figure it out. And I like to think I keep that same mindset with swimming. When you find those mental, breaks, you face them head on, and you just say, okay, it's just something. It's just a little bump in the road, nothing serious. Let's just, put our head down. Let's keep training. Let's not take away from what I can gain in the pool and the confidence I can gain in the pool. Let's just keep working, and it'll work itself out. And so I feel like that's kind of the mindset I've carried, and I've prided myself on being somebody who's always going to be in that pool, is always going to be working, and I'm not going to try to, for better terms, BS my way out of a set, or
Yeah.
what I need to do to achieve the goals I want to achieve. And so I feel like that, having that mindset of just go with the flow. It is what it is. Whatever happens, just let it go by your side and keep going forward. I think that's really allowed me to take some of those heavy mental weights off my back throughout my career, and keep improving and getting better as I get older.
Yeah, you're not going to be the swimmer that needs to quote unquote get out during the hard set and misses about half the set and then finds his way back. I'm sure probably no one at the D1 level. Maybe a few times in the past, maybe someone's done that a time or two, but it's truly about obviously pushing through the tough times and not necessarily the most easiest and best of times either.
Absolutely. It's like you say, it's hard to fake it in this sport. The times are the times, and those times come from what you do when nobody's looking, and that's the training, and everything that goes into the training.
Yeah.
And so, I've think I've learned that is that it's you're not going to be able to get by going 80%, 90%. You got to work your hardest all the time. You got to be in that pool all the time, and you got to show that you're here to work, and you're here to get better.
Exactly. And like you mentioned, you've hit your times. You've mentioned a story about junior year finally overcoming, kind of getting that breakthrough. Can you talk about just kind of that story and then just how that truly led to FAU? Because you did talk about senior year, you made the decision to do nationals, right? Like that's a decision that you made. It's a decision that obviously worked out for you, but just talk about how that junior year story ended up leading to FAU, and then why you ended up choosing FAU over maybe other schools that were interested in you.
Yeah. So junior year, that was the COVID year. So that's 2020, 2021, where, things are shut down. You don't know kind of what's coming next in terms of pool time, how long your pool is going to be open, if you're even going to be able to get into a pool. And so that summer, the summer of 2020, where, pretty much everything is closed, luckily, my summer club pool was still having those practices because it was outdoor. And so we were
Okay.
able to make it work where, that's right down the street for me. And so
Yeah.
I was able to go to practice every day down the street, and get the training I needed to, even if it was just singles throughout the summer. It was, about just staying in the pool, keeping my feel. Obviously, I wasn't going to be, hitting the times I wanted to right away because of that break of, March and April. But even during that period, I was able, lucky enough to find just small pools, indoor pools, whatever, close, friends, family friends that were, luckily, not, they let me train. And, I'm still very blessed that I had that opportunity to this day, because for me, it's so important to keep my feel and stay in that water,
Yeah.
that any more than like a week or two, it was going to be a long process to get to where I needed to be. And so I was able to stay in that water throughout the summer. And as we get to November, where we're finally starting to get back indoors, because we stayed out until October, I believe. It was like mid-October we stayed outdoors. And so we were swimming in like 30-degree air temps outside. I mean, just some of the craziest like training days happened because we trained late. So we trained at like 7 or 8 o'clock at night. It'd be pitch black, and 25 degrees outside, and we'd be running to try to warm and get our parkas off the deck. And
Yeah.
so,
You
some,
probably don't miss that at all,
no,
do
no,
you?
not at all. But I mean, it makes for some great memories. And so we get to November, and we're finally starting to get back indoors a little bit. And then they close all the indoor pools again when there's a spike. And we didn't know how long the pools were going to be closed. They gave no time frame. And so we had been talking about potentially moving temporarily to a different training hub, and we had something I had talked about my coaches with, like, hey, there are places, to go. Are there places we can go? And so there was a few options that, were given, and I actually ended up going to one that wasn't recommended, but I had heard and seen that a lot of swimmers were going there, TAC Titans in North
Okay.
Carolina. And so in November, me and my mom, we, actually it was my whole family. We drove down there, to Cary, and then, it was just me and my mom for about 6 months. But to have that training and that environment where there were a lot of kids there, and there was something we didn't really have because you could
Yeah.
only have so many kids. And so when you have, those little more lax in terms of the regulations and allowing for, instead of, 10 kids, you have 20, maybe 25. And so to have that group and the depth and the talent that comes through a program like TAC, which is just one of the best clubs in the country, you see why, because so many of their kids, they're all bought in, they're all working hard. I mean, every day it's like you always have somebody to race when you go to a club like that. And not only that, just having that kind of refreshing training. I was so used to doing that aerobic based training where it was just yards, yards, yards.
Yeah.
You go down to tack, you kind of have that period of where it's not as yardage heavy, a lot more pace work, a lot more, a little shorter. So instead of doing, 8, 9 grand of practice, you're doing maybe 5 to 7 in between there on any given day.
Yeah.
And you're starting to work with equipment and these different things that help your technique and help kind of figure out your stroke even more. And I think having that opportunity, it was almost like I was halfway tapered all the time. And so, I would go to swim meets, and my first meet, like 2 weeks after I get there, I swim my first meet. And I ended up dropping like 5 seconds in my 5 free and, 4 seconds in my 2 free. And, every time I'm hitting the water as we go, on and on, it's a PB.
Yeah.
And,
It's
I
almost
was
like
like,
what's going on, right?
yeah, yeah. And so, that was kind of that rejuvenation and that like, wow, like it's just working right now. And then having to balance it with high school swimming, which I was still doing. So
Yeah.
having to go home from time to time to swim a high school meet so I could be eligible for states. Well, that was another whole part of it that made that whole journey really interesting. And, it culminated with me, winning state meet, high school state meet my junior year in the 5. And that for me is one of my, favorite swimming memories because it was a really good race with a guy that I'm still really good friends with. And we still talk from time to time. And having that memory and knowing kind of the journey just to get there and, the traveling and the training, it's just such a crazy year.
Oh yeah.
To have it culminate in something like that, and especially where I really didn't swim a lot of the Michigan meets growing up,
Okay.
and so I'm not gonna like. I think people knew who I was, but they never saw me swim and race. They just kind of saw my times, and so I didn't really have that in-state like times or competitions, where it was like, okay, like he's a pretty good swimmer,
Yeah.
and so to finally do that in Michigan and win the state championship. For me, that was a really cool moment because, it kind of put me, I guess, on the recruit, not just the recruiting map, but just the state in terms of like, the state talent in our class. It was cool to finally have that moment where it was like, yeah, like, you're up there with, some of the best guys in this class in terms of your times.
Yeah, it's more of just like, hey, like I'm actually a real person. I'm here. Like I'm
Yeah,
not just timed. Like I'm
yeah,
here to compete. I'm here to
exactly.
win. And I'm sure it's going to be something that you'll never forget. I'm sure that's probably one of your greatest memories. Like winning a state championship in any sport is just so difficult to do, like in general. And I'm sure, like you probably mentioned that, like you still talk to the guy that you competed against. I'm sure. I don't know how much you guys bring up that state race anymore. Maybe he might poke a little bit of fun or might bring it up every once in a while, saying, "Hey, I got the best of you there." But I'm sure it's probably more of a fun type of thing, but something like you said, you'll never forget.
Absolutely. It's more just a respect, I think, for your
Yeah.
competitors when you talk about it, like, because you're both really good swimmers,
Oh yeah.
and you have that time, and that having that kind of bond through that is always something you can, a good race with somebody, a swimmer, you've never swam for, is a great way to kind of have that connection, that long lasting connection, and I think that's kind of getting to swim more and more people as I got older. I think more and more of those connections I was able to gain with a lot of the swimmers around the state.
Exactly, which is great. Some of those connections you still have right now, I'm sure. And then the countless stories I've heard from athletes that have competed in their sport in college, swimmers, basketball players, baseball players, wrestlers, just the amount of stories I've heard about how they use COVID as an opportunity to get better, as an opportunity to grow, is just incredible because a lot of people think back to COVID. They might not necessarily remember, hey, what exactly happened during COVID? Because to me, COVID was kind of a blur. Maybe it was a little bit for you now that it's been 5+ years ago at this point. But it's just so cool seeing how people use COVID as an opportunity to get better, as an opportunity to grow in their sport, rather than letting it be a detriment to them. Obviously, with COVID, obviously with the sickness, all that kind of stuff, it wasn't good. Like no, like what was happening on the world wasn't good. But athletes used it in a way to get better, to give them future opportunities. And I think that part of it is something people don't realize or something people don't talk about. I feel like more people talk about kind of like the negative parts of it, like, hey, kids might not be getting as many chances. Well, there's still kids out there working, there's still kids putting in that time, and it truly seemed like you put in that time, which obviously ended up leading you to your story down to North Carolina, your story winning a state championship, your story being a D1 athlete at FAU. And that is just incredible, honestly. And how did you even end up at FAU? I know you said that you were getting recruited by teams in the Midwest, but like, what was that kind of call, email, text like when they're like, hey, we want you to come down to Florida, especially being someone that you mentioned is really close to family?
Yeah, so the whole recruiting process, it was an interesting one, as I've kind of mentioned previously, with the whole senior year kind of going into that last meet. So a lot of that I blame myself because I feel like I didn't take advantage of the recruiting process as much as I should have. Looking back now, I feel like I waited a little bit too long,
Okay.
and therefore, I got kind of was already a step behind when I actually started talking to schools and reaching out. And so for me, there was about 5 or 6 schools that I had originally reached out to. A lot of them were, like I said, Midwest, high end D2s, some D3s, but there wasn't a ton of D1s that I had reached out to because I really wasn't sure where level wise, where I was at. And I
Okay.
think that junior year, that really gave me the confidence to, reach out to a few schools, start conversations with some of those, D1 schools. Because when you think D1, you think, okay, like that's the big leagues, right?
Yeah.
Like there's level, like I said, there's levels to swimming, and I mean, you're
Yep.
D1, you can say you're a pretty good swimmer, and
I can say more than pretty good. I would say if you're a D1 swimmer, you're really good in my opinion. But just my opinion. You
yeah,
can say
yeah,
what you want to say.
yeah, yeah. So I mean, that kind of there's the D3 to D2 to D1, and it's like, am I good enough to reach out to these schools even? And
Yeah.
finally breaking through on some of those times, I think that kind of gave me that, okay, reach out, talk to them, see what they're kind of feeling. And one of those obviously was FAU. And so FAU was the only school that I actually came on an official visit to.
Okay.
Um, I did that in October of 2021. And, it was a really cool visit. Getting to and see the environment and all that, I really enjoyed it, right? And so, already I'm thinking, okay, this would definitely be a cool school, to come to. I think it's a good environment. I like the team. Everybody seemed to be really good, and so I come away with that with a really positive experience. But recruiting wise, time wise, I still had a little bit of ways to go, and that's kind of where I talk about those goal times
Yeah.
and trying to hit those throughout the season. And so I had some goal times I was reaching for pretty much this entire year. And, as I get into February and I'm training, a lot of these spots that are from these other schools I'm talking to are closing up, right?
Yeah.
They're running out of space. They don't have any more spots. They've, got all their commits, right? And so by the time I get to March, I'm kind of in this spot where, okay, it's FAU and this one other Denison,
Okay.
in Ohio.
Yeah.
And so it was either you you hit the goal times, and you get a spot at FAU, or you don't hit them, and you're going to Denison, and both schools great with the recruiting. Denison did a very good job as well. I want to just give them a shout out too because their recruiting process was very, very good, very interactive, and they did a very good
Okay.
job. And so that's why those kind of were my final two. But a lot of it, not having those other, options, it was kind of like, wow, it's one or the other,
Yeah.
coming down to the finish here. And so, to obviously it goes how it goes. I get sick, and I have to wait, and thankfully there's a spot open for me here at FAU, and that allowed me, finally to kind of have that stress relieved off my back. But at the same time, I knew coming in, you got to improve, you got to work. You
Yeah.
can't just go in now that you've made it to college and the D1 level. You have to work, and you have to have the the grind like a D1 athlete.
Yeah.
And I'm not gonna say I'm not athletic, but I don't really think I was ever blessed with the genes of a D1 athlete. I mean, when you think of a D1 swimmer, I mean you're thinking 6 foot plus,
Yeah.
long arms, long legs, all that stuff that makes a good swimmer. I'm pretty much the opposite of every single like good swimming trait. I'm short. I don't have long arms. I don't have long legs. I'm not super strong, and you know, so I end up kind of being almost. I take on this underdog mindset going in, and I knew I wasn't gonna be the fastest. Just I probably was gonna have some reality checks. I wasn't gonna be the one that sets the pace for everybody and be the fastest. And that's I never really wanted going in. I never really wanted to be the fastest at the school I was going to. I
Okay.
always wanted there to be somebody to chase because
Yeah.
I feel like when I'm in that position where there's somebody to catch and there's a person to go after, I feel like that's where I'm at my best. And being right in the middle of that environment of grinding and training and trying to work to the level of the ones who may have the physical traits, the physical capabilities, and that natural talent.
Yeah.
I knew it was going to take more work on my end to match that, their speed and their just natural ability. And so, as soon as it's kind of something I carried when I knew I wasn't going to get taller and I, was going to have to work with what I was. And so I, took that mindset on of an underdog, and I knew it was going to be a lot of it up to me, how hard I wanted to work, and how I trained. And so I feel like I pride myself on being just a grinder and somebody who, may not look the part of a D1 level swimmer, but as soon as we hit that pool, you throw that all aside, and it's whatever you've done in the pool versus whatever they've done in the pool.
Yeah, because everyone is stepping on the blocks. It doesn't matter exactly how you look. It doesn't matter how you compare to everyone else. It's about you mentioned about putting in the effort, having that underdog mindset, having that mindset to grind. And I truly think that that mindset, while you said you had that kind of going into college, I feel like that truly started maybe like when COVID happened, maybe prior to COVID, like that kind of mindset that you kind of like grown into of wanting to be competitive, maybe not wanting to be the fastest guy, like trying to catch the fastest guy. It truly starts from there. But you did mention the fact that you knew kind of going into it that there's going to be some bumps in the road. And obviously, with the transition to college in general, especially when you're going so far away, that's difficult in itself. Like even for people that like go to college that isn't super far away, like the college transition is difficult in its outright just self, even not being an athlete. But for you, what was the transition like from high school club training to college training? Like, did you have a quote unquote welcome to college the moment when you first got to FAU that you're like, okay, like this is a little bit different. Not like I don't want to say not like you don't feel like you belong, but like it's almost like you're like, okay, like this is a different beast.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, my freshman year was definitely a, lesson and what it means to be not just a Division I athlete, but a mature, adult, right?
Yeah,
And so I'm coming in, I'm pretty young, so I'm coming in, 18, right? Pretty on the younger side. And, I knew there was going to be differences in, how things worked in the college D1 college landscape,
yep,
right? But I think for me especially, there was some growing pains. The first thing was living. The living situation my freshman year was kind of weird. So I lived with some non-athletes just because of a last second guy who didn't show up. And
yeah,
so I end up living by myself where I don't really have anybody else around me who's in the same environment, understands the grind, understands kind of what it takes. And so there were a lot of days where, it's 3 a.m. and my room is still loud and there's people all in there, people all over the room and it's loud and, I
yeah,
can't sleep, and so that living adjustment was definitely, a challenge, I think. And not only that, just mistakes on my end, just clumsiness, waking up late. I definitely did that once or more, during my freshman year. Just stupid mistakes that you make when you're, still kind of in that high school mode, even, I guess I could say, or when you
yeah,
still, trying to learn the differences between what it's like being in high school and college. And so there were some times where my coaches, they tore into me pretty good my freshman year about, maturity and belonging and what it takes to belong, at a program like FAU. And that was tough in the moment, but I think I took it and I used it as motivation to, not only improve in the pool, but improve myself and, take those lessons in maturing and apply them, when I could.
yeah.
And so, I feel like that relationship with my coaches has, become better and better as I've gotten on, and I feel like I've learned a lot, and I've, think my coaches would say the same. So, there was that aspect of it, and the swimming aspect of it was definitely a little bit of a transition too, because we were definitely doing a little less yardage here,
Okay,
in college. And so, the training was definitely a little bit of adjustment, which I had some, being at North Carolina, it was a little bit more like that, but not
okay,
exactly the same. So it's kind of its own, beast per se. And
yeah,
so, learning how to work through that, it took probably, a year or so. That first year was pretty decent.
okay,
But there's obviously the growing pains and just getting acclimated to the new training for me. The biggest thing for me that I take from going from high school to college swimming that I'm thankful for, I'd say is one, the ability to branch out into events like the 2 fly, the 4 a.m. Because growing up, I swam everything. And that was one thing my coach he wanted to stress was you need to swim everything. You need to know how to do every event and know what every race feels like. And so I swam every event as a kid, and so I had that experience. And so when my coaches wanted me to swim, hey, try the 2 fly, let's try the 4 a.m. Let's work on. I think there's improvement there.
yeah,
That was pretty easy for me. And the other thing that I was very thankful for is kind of like not expecting, too much in terms of like compliments and being over flattered. My coaches, they never, were super like, oh, you're the best, you do this. They were very humble when it came to like, they were very like, oh, good job, you did good.
yep,
And so I think that taught me not to be super, flamboyant or go out there and be like, oh yeah, like I'm the best, or I'm gonna beat every like. I've
yeah,
always tried to be humble and quiet and not too celebratory. Like I don't think I've celebrated more than like once after my race. I try to just be cool, calm, and collected through the good races and the bad races. And so I think that's something, taking that into college was very good for me because I knew I was there to work. I wasn't there to be, pampered by coaches, and I knew what my goal was because it'll take the hard work is what's going to, they're going to see the hard work and they're going to, it may not be verbally communicated, but they're going to gain respect for you if you're coming every day and you're putting that work in and you're doing what you need to do to be, fast, to get better, to improve and be, a valuable piece of the team. And so that's always for me what I've taken away, from high school to college that I'm very thankful for.
And sometimes, like your experience, sometimes you need tough love and not all praise all the time. Like sometimes you need to hear those things that you don't necessarily want to hear. I'm sure probably at the time probably didn't necessarily make you feel good, but made you push yourself and made you give more effort and kind of have that notice of giving more effort, putting in your all. And then obviously you have your teammates as well, competing with your teammates, but pushing all the teammates along the path as well. Like teammates are extremely important in all of this. And I know you mentioned that like distance wise, like it's less than what you've done prior, but you also swim probably the most, I don't want to say hated events, but like the events like swimmers don't typically want to sign up for. Like you're just swimming the absolutely brutal like 4 a.m. mile. Like you're swimming the events that people are like, yeah, you can go swim. I don't want to swim that myself. So it's almost, I don't want to say it's almost like you're punishing yourself, but it kind of feels like that tough love obviously pushed you to not only get better, but also get to know your coaches, get to know your teammates, and have that competitive drive and have that willing to try other things, which has also led you to trying open water, which I know is something that you don't necessarily love the most from initial conversations that we've had. By the way, you're laughing a little bit. I think you can kind of agree with that. But like, how has open water been? Like, what's the most significant challenge when it comes to open water compared to in the pool? And just how do you address that? How have you been dealing with that? I know you told me a story about open water, which would absolutely freak me out to ever do that ever. You don't obviously have to share that story because I know it involves someone else. But yeah, how it's just been dealing with kind of that tough love when it comes to open water. It's something that you don't necessarily always love the most.
Yeah, so a lot of it is actually stemming from a fear that's totally outside of the realm of the actual swimming. Um, Fun fact about me, my biggest fear is ships and the undersides of boats and like shipwrecks. It all stems from, I know this sounds crazy, it's an experience I had when I was about 6 years old. I was paddleboarding with my dad and my friend's dad and his son. And so we were on this little four-person paddle boat, and we're in this little bay because they have a cottage and it's on a little bay.
Yeah.
And so the mouth of the bay, there's two shipwrecks, and they're halfway submerged, halfway underwater,
Okay.
right? And so you can go out and see them or paddleboard or do whatever out to them,
Yeah.
right? Because they're, it's clear water, it's Michigan lakes, obviously, shallow. And so they decided, they were like, oh, let's go out there and let's go paddleboard and let's go see it. And so we get out there, and obviously I'm pretty young at this time, probably 6 or 7 years old. And
Yeah.
so I, that and my, the friend's dad's son, he's a little older than me, but he probably, not super heavy as well. But then you got my dad and my friend's dad, they're, a little bit heavier than both of us.
Yeah.
And so our weight distribution was way off. And so we're, out there by this boat, and we are damn near capsizing and we're right next to it. And like, and every time we capsize, it's like we're going to fall on top of like the boat and all the wood. And it's like, it terrified me so bad. And I
Yeah.
got off that boat. I was crying, and I was like, I never want to do that again. And that instilled a fear of shipwrecks and
Oh yeah.
boats in the water for me that I still carry to this day. And the previous 3 years, And this year as well, we always go to an open water competition in December. And the last 3 years, I've gotten out of it because I've told them, like, guys, it's in this bay, so it's at this campus where it basically just feeds off right into the inlet, right? Because obviously, being on the South Florida coast, it's a camp, it's got the water right there, water access.
Yeah.
And so, the course is literally like in a bay with a bunch of ships. And they're all just sitting there, and there's multiple like little sunken sailboats right by the course. And I've always told them, I was like, guys, I can't do that because if I go out there and see that, I'm not going to, like, I may have a panic attack.
Yeah.
It's serious. Like, it's so hard. Like, they have such trouble believing it, but it's like, like, this is a real experience, a real fear, right? And
Rightfully so, right?
yeah, it's like, they always have trouble understanding it. And I'm just like, it's a fear that I've had through experience, right? And so the last 3 years, they've given me grace, and they've said, we're not going to make you do it. But this year, it's at a closed course. So it's like in Sarasota or something, and it's this like park kayaking facility or rowing facility that's, kind of closed off from the actual, ocean or any, those inlets. So they were like, okay, last year they sat me down like right before they went for their meet, and they were like, we're going to give you a year's advance here. You're swimming it next year. You're doing it at least once while you're here. And if you need to see a psychiatrist, go see somebody. But we want to prepare you because we're going to make you go next year because we want you to do it at least once. And so, because it was in the closed water, I didn't fight him on it. I was like, okay, I'll do it because, I know the environments and it's going to be a little more controlled.
Yeah.
And so, now that I know that I have to do at least one, taking advantage of these ocean swims and stuff has been very important. And so I've been learning, like every time I get in the water, it's just learning, trying to learn the mechanics of open water swimming. And, I found it to be quite fun, actually, because it's where, everybody's always told me, my coaches, they've always said, like, you could be a pretty good open water swimmer if you wanted to be, but I've just never taken it. I've been like, nah, it's just not my thing. But the fact that I have to do at least one before my career is over. I want to learn as much about it as possible and see like, hey, is this something fun? Is it cool? At least did I miss out, or do I regret not doing it? When I was younger. And so I've had a really fun time getting to do it with, especially like my teammates who have a little bit more open water experience. Learning from them and drafting off of them has been really fun. But I found actually my favorite thing to do is go kind of on the outside, about 5 yards away from them, and just kind of have my own clear water.
Okay.
One, because I feel like clear water is a little better than the big conglomerate of swimmers in an open water competition. And two, it just I can kind of see where everybody's at, and I don't have to worry about getting kicked or punched in the face. Because I've heard these open water competitions can get quite physical, especially at the start. And so I'm trying to avoid getting kicked in the face or something, a couple months out from our conference meet. But I want to take it in. I want to take in the experience this year. And so by learning, I'm just trying to learn as much as possible, through these, opportunities that we're, lucky enough to have with the ocean. I think it's been a cool process, to learn and prepare for.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And how are you feeling? You're a couple months out. Are you feeling like you're going to be ready? Obviously, you're going to have to go do it anyways, but like, where's your mindset at that? Are you still kind of going through that process, trying to acknowledge that, hey, we're a couple months out from this?
I mean, I'm pretty confident, like overall. I think, my endurance and my aerobic capacity, I feel like at the very least will carry me through it.
Yeah.
Just to say I finished one would be my goal. But I know there's some really experienced and really actually talented, open water collegiate swimmers that go to this competition we're going to.
Okay.
So, it brings in quite a few, teams, and there's quite a few, people entered from each team. It's, probably 30 teams, 35 teams, and each team has about 5 guys. So,
Okay.
I mean, you're talking about 150 guys almost.
Yeah.
And so, it makes for a good competition to start with, right? And
Absolutely.
I'm just going to be trying to drink through a fire hose, right, and learn from them when I actually, because, it's one thing to race your teammates in the ocean, but when you're actually racing against guys who have that experience, I'm just going to be trying to learn. I'm sure I'll be learning as I swim it.
Oh,
You know,
probably.
and it'll be more about just controlling, knowing when to go, and because it's a long race. It's a lot longer than your average 15-minute mile.
Yeah.
It's about four of those. So taking it slow, keeping it controlled, but using my aerobic abilities, to my advantage to try to keep it, nice and long, nice and fast, I guess.
Exactly, and we might have you back on the podcast after that race. Get your thoughts on it. Talk about it. Just talk about how your season's been going so far. Might have you jump on in a couple of months.
Yeah, whenever. I mean, I'm having a great time just talking. I mean, I've been here for an hour already, and I mean, I feel like I got so much more. Like I said, I love talking, and I have a tendency to talk quite a bit. But I'm enjoying reminiscing and talking about my whole swim journey. It's fun.
Yeah, absolutely. I know. Obviously, we've been in an hour, so I don't want to take up a ton more of your time. So I kind of wrap up here with three last kind of questions. One of the questions I really want to kind of get into, though, is what's one set or practice that you'll never forget you have ever swam? Like it could be prior to college, it could be at FAU. What's just a set that was just so brutal, so mentally or physically difficult that you're like, I have no idea how I made it through?
So I'm gonna answer this one a little differently.
Okay.
It's not a set per se, but it's a week of training that I can remember. For better or for worse, can remember. So it was the first week after I had come back from North Carolina.
Okay.
And so my club team, they're finally back indoors, but they're training at a different pool than we usually train at. So it's this small little kind of dingy, 6-lane pool that doesn't have blocks. It's pretty shallow
Yeah.
and not great air quality. All that. I know, and so. I get back and I'm like, okay, well, this is the facility. Got to just roll with it.
Yeah.
And that week, my coach pretty much is like, we're going to throw the book at you. And so every day of that week, I was given a different, pretty much set from, I don't even know how to explain it. Just the worst sets we've probably done in all of our time, all thrown together in a week span. So, I mean, you start out on Monday with, your 15 500s, and then you got your 2200s fly, then you got your 3200s free, then you got your 10 400 IMs where you have to go halfway underwater on each wall, and then you got your 5 1000s, and then you got your fast stuff on Saturday where you're doing like miles, and
Yeah.
that whole week I remember it, and I was like, I was almost like, man, why did I come back this early? Why am I like, I was like, I should have stayed in North Carolina for a little longer if I knew this is what I was going to come back to. Um,
Exactly.
but yeah, no, it was good week, I guess, to get me back into the aerobic training that I kind of was missing from North Carolina for sure. But that's definitely one that's going to stick in my mind for a long time.
I was just gonna say you're probably like, I'm glad I did that, but at the same time, never again.
Oh yeah, in the moment I was like, man, this sucks. Like this freaking sucks.
Oh yeah.
But looking back on it, it's like, all right, just another week of training that I've gone through in my career of distance. So
Exactly, and you're in your last year of swimming, of distance. What's kind of your goals like at this year? Like with everything that you've been through, with its ups, with its downs, you've been a D1 swimmer, which most people would dream of being a D1 athlete. Like, what's just some of your goals and kind of heading into your last year? Like, how excited are you, or is it more of kind of like a mix of emotions right now, knowing that, hey, you know what, this might be my last time ever competing?
yeah, great question. So for me, swim wise, last year was the best season I've had, you know, up to date in terms of PBing in my best events, finally breaking a lot of those barriers that I've been trying so long to break through, high school and all my years here. I think that culminated with winning a medal, in the mile at my conference meet. And to do that for my, the team and
Yeah.
represent that team in such a way, it's been it was in the moment, it was so, gratifying, to finally be on that podium and have that medal. And, I still got it hanging up in my room here, just as a reminder of kind of what the work will do for you, and how it'll pay off all those hard practices and hard work. Coming into this year, I see it as kind of a chance to build upon that, work with technique. With the coaching, our coaching, distance coach carousel has been kind of crazy, in my time here, just because of, coaches leaving and,
Yeah.
all that. Obviously, you're going to have coaches coming and going. And, sometimes we've had coaches leave right before the season starts, and then, we're stuck with kind of whoever we can get. And so, yeah, and I mean, that was very prevalent last year. And so you don't know how you're going to do going into that year. And, to have it end the way it did so well, it kind of just, at that point, it was like, it doesn't matter who's coaching you. It just matters about what kind of sets you're doing and how, what kind of mindset you're bringing in to the pool every day. And so for me this year, I mean, I'm hoping to have that impact for my team, finish it off strong. I don't want to, mail it in my senior year, because I know the senior year can be, a tough one for a lot of swimmers just trying to get through. But for me, it's not like that, and I contribute that a lot to just my healthy relationships I've had with swimming throughout my career and kind of the love I still have for it. I plan for this year. I want this year to be my fastest year, and I want to go out, with flying colors and work. And I feel like it's been really good now that I have a solid distance coach here, after a couple years where I was kind of looking for one, and we've had kind of just rotational coaches. Working with him, he's a younger guy, and so he kind of understands, and we have that good relationship. And so that's, for me, it gives me a lot of excitement for what's to come, leading into our midseason and our conference and all the other meets. And so, swim-wise, that's what I'm looking for. But also now, being a senior, the leadership aspect and, being kind of that example for the young guys. I'm lucky enough to have a really, really good class. Like, we had a really good class come in this year, and we got a great distance group, right? But the thing is, they're all really young. They're all freshmen and sophomores, and so there's not a lot of that, upperclassmen, senior, kind of guidance of kind of what to do and knowing the ropes. And so for me, I've enjoyed really just being kind of that knowledge, that wisdom for a lot of these guys. And, I've already been called uncle this year, on the team, which is like, no, one of our freshmen keeps calling me uncle, and I'm like, oh my God, like
How does that feel?
Oh, he's right, because I'm old, but like,
You're
it's
not
like,
old.
wow, it's like I'm like the long tenured veteran here now. And so, for me, the least I can do is help these guys, know the ropes and learn how to do stuff and motivate them and help them to, be examples for the next class that comes in when I'm gone. And so I've had a great time balancing those two things, and I'm really excited, for the season. And, another thing academically, I'm looking to finish strong. It's been really good for me academically here as well. Maintaining that good GPA and such. And so it's trying to just be that exemplary, not just in the pool for, the swimmers, but showing them kind of academic, like, hey, this is kind of what the school is going to look like. This is what the workload is going to look like. This is how you manage everything, right? And I think when you do that, you get even more kind of respect from the coaches, not for just being, a good, athlete on the team and making that impact on the team, but making that impact, in the classroom and having those, accolades for what, when we win academic awards, being kind of there and, being that GPA, having that GPA that kind of bolsters in those accolades. So for me, it's just about, being the best, exemplary, person. While I may not lead by example all the time, I'm not a captain or anything. That was never really me, because vocally I'm not really the most like loudest, and like, I'm not great with motivation, I guess, to say the least, like in terms of like, all right guys, let's do it. But like for me, I think I find my calling in just being, leading by example. And so that's really what I've just hold on to, throughout this year, and it's what I want to be from now until, my last swim here. and so it's I'm really looking forward to finishing this year out for
Yeah,
sure.
it's about leaving the right legacy. Like, obviously, you have the medal, you have the accomplishments. You're now the older one out of the group. Like, you have kind of that opportunity to really be that leader, be the person that truly helps the freshmen, the sophomores continuing to grow. It's about really setting not only success for you for this year, but it's about success for them and yourself in the future as well, because you're going to be going on to the workforce. I don't know if you're going to continue to swim or not, but like, how has swimming prepared you for life outside of the pool? And do you still expect to swim and like for workouts after this year? Are you truly kind of done? Because I know that's kind of a mixed bag, because some swimmers might be like, hey, I've been swimming for so long, I kind of just want to be done. Some might be like, hey, I want to take a year break, or some might be, well, this has been my life, I don't want to leave it.
Yeah, great question. So for me, um, the swimming, it's right now it's hard to tell you what my plans are after I finish out this season, because for me I just try to take it like it's just another year, right? And
Yeah,
I haven't really thought about like this is the last first practice, this is the last first meet, you're coming up on your last mid season. I haven't really put it in that term. I've kind of just been like, all right, another day of practice, let's get up, let's go work, and let's you know get there and be there and do the things that I need to do to be prepared for the end of the year or the midseason when I gotta step up and swim well. And so I haven't really had those thoughts yet, or those like those feelings of wow, like this is gonna be it. And right now, I could probably say like, whenever I will know when the moment comes to where it's like, okay, I think it's time. Like I will know it's time, but I feel like the love, I think when it actually hits, I feel like I'm gonna really struggle with that. This is it. Just
yeah,
because it's played such a big part in my life and going back to my family. That my family's life, and it's just something that we all together have been through, right? And so
exactly.
leaving that behind, it's gonna be. I think when I get there, it's going to be difficult. And I've enjoyed the sport through its ups and its downs and all the hardship and all the success. Um, but I know that whenever the time may be to stop swimming competitively, I gave it 100%. I worked. I took on that mindset that nothing's going to be given. You're going to have to go out there and get everything you want in this sport, because you are not, you know, people are going to look at you and they're going to think you don't, have what it takes.
Yeah,
And so, that is, like I said, that's what's fueled me through all of these years. And it's what's going to fuel me to the end. And whether I go out and set, three best times in my final meet, or, I go and I don't have the swims I want. It's just that knowledge of, okay, you've accomplished what you want. You're happy with where you're at. You can happily, you can call it knowing that you've done everything in your, within you, for the sport and for your team. And
exactly.
so, that's kind of how I think of it. Post competitive, I'm sure I'll find my way somehow, some way into a pool. That bond I have with swimming, it's still as strong as ever, and so it's going to be hard for me probably not to be back there in some capacity.
Yeah,
Even if it's what keeps me in shape after I'm done, because obviously the benefits of swimming is that it keeps you in shape through your college years, and that's always something that's important.
it,
And so, yeah, I mean, I'm definitely there will be some part of swimming. I will always be in the loop of swimming. I know I want to keep up with swimming even once I'm done. I know it's going to be a part of me for from my last stroke of college to when I'm older.
exactly. And also, if you want to continue competitively, there's also masters as well. So that's always an option. I obviously don't know if that's something you would ever truly consider. But obviously, you have a full year left to go. I truly wish you the best. I really do hope you end up getting your personal best, your personal records. I really do hope you end up getting back on the podium. I hope you're able to achieve the goals that you want to achieve. And one thing that I always say to anyone that ever joins is that, one, obviously, thank you so much for taking your time to join. It's been a blast. Like, I've really enjoyed this conversation. I'm sure we could probably go for another hour and a half if we truly wanted to. But two, also, just you're welcome on at any point. The door is always open. Would love to have you back on. I'm sure there's probably a real possibility that happens. If not, that's completely all right as well. But I truly do appreciate you taking a lot of your day to join to talk about swimming. It's been truly fun. It's been an honor. And yeah, you have a really cool story.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate you reaching out and giving me the opportunity to come on here. I haven't told anybody that I'm doing this, so I'm gonna kind of just surprise them and be like, hey, if you want to listen, I'm sure my dad or whoever will be more than joy to listen to this. So, I'm glad I could come on here, kind of tell my story, give you some good information and answer some of those, questions, those deep questions about my swimming career. It's been really fun. And, I appreciate you, reaching out and giving me this opportunity.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I appreciate you joining. I know you're a busy schedule, but yeah, no, I really appreciate everything you've done. Like I said, best of luck this next year. Best of luck in your future as well. And yeah, that is a wrap to episode number 496. Thank you again to Gianni for joining, and tune in to the next episode.